I've been driving 18-wheelers for the better part of 15 years now, and in all my time on the highways and byways of this great nation of ours, I've only seen one thing that's ever really scared me. I'm not saying that I'm hardcore or something. I've had plenty of things make me anxious or nervous, and I sure do a whole lot of worrying when I'm out there in the great unknown all by my lonesome. But only one single, solitary thing that I can safely say terrified me. I was driving through South Dakota hauling lumber down Highway 73. Out there, some of the most barren, featureless land you could ever have the misfortune of seeing. Don't get me wrong, I love this state. It's home, and it'll always be my home. But sometimes you just want something to look at while you're driving, you know? Anyway, I'm driving down this particularly empty stretch of 73. A place where you can see for miles and miles in every direction. Just all horizons as far as the eye can see. When suddenly I see something on the side of the road. I couldn't tell exactly what it was until I was maybe a few hundred meters away, but it looked an awful lot like a guy crouching over something that was lying at the roadside. It looked like he was picking something up off the ground and bringing it up to his face. It was only as I passed them that I realized what was going on. The thing that was lying on the ground was a piece of roadkill. I don't know if it was a deer or antelope or whatever you want to call it. In fact, I'm not exactly sure what kind of animal it was. I just know that the hands and face of whoever was leaning over it were covered in blood. They were eating that piece of roadkill, and it doesn't take a genius to figure that out. I just have no idea why. I've had people ask me why I didn't stop to see what the person's deal was, but I always turned the question around on them and ask if they'd want to stop their truck in the middle of nowhere to talk to someone who was eating a dead animal. Apart from the occasional tough guy who lies through their teeth and claims that they would have gotten out with a gun to play 20 questions or whatever, the answer's always the same: no. I've had a few fairly reasonable suggestions to explain what I was looking at, and some not too reasonable ones too. Some of the less believable range from Bigfoot to Wolfman to the zombie apocalypse. Some people have seen too many movies, but I actually buy one of the more legit suggestions. We have a few weirdo survivalist enclaves out here in South Dakota, one of which is the old military base turned survivalist compound in the Black Hills that they call X Point. You have to have a fair amount of scratch stashed away to buy one of those bunkers, but I've heard people really do live there. People that have half lost their minds. Anyways, it could have been someone like that eating the roadkill, someone with too much money and not enough brains who had decided to train themselves for the end of the world. But I can almost guarantee that by eating raw roadkill like that, the only thing they'd be preparing for is their own grave. I use quite a sophisticated GPS system in my truck, meaning I'm able to track and review my journeys in some pretty amazing detail. So when I had enough bars on my cell phone, I called 911 to let them know that there was some crazy person eating roadkill along 73 and passed on the rough location of where I'd spotted them. I didn't do it to be a narc or anything. I mainly did it because whoever it was obviously needed some serious help. That, and the obvious danger they pose to any regular people who might be unfortunate enough to bump into them while they're in the mood to eat raw roadkill. I just can't imagine what would possess anyone to do something like that. I mean, how close to insanity or desperation do you have to be to just shovel some dead animal's raw guts into your mouth like that? I later had an uncle tell me about feral humans, like this one girl who escaped her abusive parents in the 70s. When the authorities found her, she was growling like a dog or something. He thought maybe the guy was like that, just totally feral, and had maybe just adapted to eating raw meat like that. I'll file that one under one of the less believable explanations, and the truth is, I don't really think I want to know what was going through their head. Forgive me for commandeering someone else's story here, but I think it's very relevant to the thread. Although my father wasn't a trucker, this incident closely involved someone who was. Back in the 70s, my dad was an 18-year-old gas station attendant at a 24-hour gas station. One night, Dad was the only one working the late shift when one of the sketchiest customers he'd ever laid eyes on walked into the station. My dad said it was really obvious that the guy was concealing something in his pants, and his first thought, which brought on some major panic, was that the guy had a gun on him. Now, a whole lot of truck drivers used to use his station for two reasons. Number one, it had a pretty roomy parking lot which they used to take naps and breaks in, and number two, it was the only place for miles around where they could get a bite to eat. Usually there could have been up to 10 truckers parked up in the lot, but on this particular night, there was only one truck there. Luckily though, the guy just so happened to be in the store with my dad. but since Dad didn't know if he was armed or what kind of guy he was, he figured he was still pretty vulnerable. The weird guy started walking up and down the rows in the store, and my dad could tell he wasn't really looking at anything. Most customers either came in to pay for their gas or went straight to the hot food counter to pick out something to eat. The weird guy looked like he was just biding his time before he pulled out his gun and robbed the store. At least that's what was going through my dad's head. The trucker came up to the counter while this was happening, put down a bag of chips, and just so happened to look over his shoulder at the sketchy guy. Then, this moment of pure understanding occurred. The trucker looked at the sketchy guy, then looked at my dad, then back and forth maybe once or twice more, then asked my dad what was supposed to sound like a totally random question. He said something like, "Quiet night, huh? I wouldn't feel safe working at a gas station alone. You keep the gun behind the counter there or something?" All my dad had was a bat, and even so, it belonged to the station's owner. But the trucker widened his eyes and mimed a nod at my dad, who suddenly realised what he was supposed to say in reply. "Oh yeah," he said. "I got a 45 right here, always just in arm's reach." The trucker continued to play along and banged his fist on the counter before kind of shielding the action with his body. "Oh yeah," he said. "Well, check this out, 357 Magnum, bought it after I saw that movie Dirty Harry. Not as big a bullet as your 45, but it sure does pack a punch. Some days I just pray some SOB messes with me so I can blow his freaking head off." Dad said that the sketchy guy just made a beeline for the door, got back into his car, then zoomed off down the highway. When the guy had left, the trucker turned back to my dad and said something along the lines of, "You know that guy was about to rob you, right? I was going to take a nap out back, but I think I'm more in the mood for coffee after that. Oh, and do yourself a favour, call the cops." My dad said he always figured guardian angels would be all cherubic, half-naked winged ladies that descend playing harps or whatever. He didn't figure they came in the form of some hairy trucker who smelled like he hadn't showered in 3 days. But as he puts it, every day is a school day. The guy spent the entire rest of his break hanging around the store, making conversation with my dad until the cops showed up and my dad could file a report. The trucker confirmed the story too, backing my dad up when he said it looked like the sketchy guy had a gun stuffed in the back of his pants. Then get this, right in the middle of talking to the cops, both of their radios started buzzing, and they ran out of the gas station, got into the patrol car and sped off down the highway with their lights and sirens on. The trucker's response: "I hope our friend and his gun didn't find the trouble they were looking for." Only they had. My dad said he read in the newspaper the next day that the very same guy, based on the description in the paper, had walked into another gas station about 10 miles down the highway, but unlike my dad, the clerk in that station hadn't been so lucky. The guy was the actual owner and operator of the station, tried to resist the robbery and ended up paying with his life. From what my dad could tell, the sketchy guy pulled his gun, the station owner went for his, and the sketchy guy just pulled the trigger. Boom! Killed him behind his own counter. Now, my dad obviously didn't have a gun, but he said he was panicking just watching the guy walking around the store. If that was him getting robbed by someone with such an itchy trigger finger, he might have made a wrong move or something and BAM! I literally wouldn't even be around today to write this. I think the sketchy guy ended up getting the death penalty too, that or died in some shootout with the cops. Maybe even the same cops who attended my dad's call. I can't quite remember which, but Dad always mentions him getting what he deserved whenever he tells the story. Now, I don't have to tell you how glad I am of that too, because even though it's so surreal to me, the idea of someone actually hurting my dad is just on a whole other kind of rage that I would feel. Dad's story doesn't just give me a belief in guardian angels, even if they do appear in unconventional forms, but it also makes me believe that there might just be something like divine justice too. I'm not a long-haul trucker and I don't drive an 18-wheeler, but I do drive a flatbed truck that makes deliveries around my home state of Maine, and more importantly, I definitely have a creepy story to share with you guys. One night, back in the winter of 2008, I was driving down this dark stretch of road in the late evening. With it being winter, it was already dark out. I was driving between towns, and some stretches of road out here barely have lights on them. I could only see what my headlights were lighting up, so imagine how scared I was when suddenly my headlights picked up a guy just standing right in the middle of the road. I had to swerve to miss him. I swear, I only just missed the guy. Put it this way, I passed so close to him that I could tell the guy's eyes were closed as I passed him. Yeah, that close. And that wasn't the only detail I noticed about the guy. Not only was he dressed entirely in white, but he looked like he had some kind of white makeup all over his face and head too. The guy was bald, and he had this same bright white skin tone all over. The second I came to a stop, I jumped out of my truck and ran back to see if he was okay. I mean, I was still worried I might have clipped him on the way past or something, because like I said, I must have been just inches from smashing this guy. But as I ran back just a few feet, I noticed the road was completely empty. I've had people say to me, "Oh, it's definitely a ghost." And let me tell you, it wasn't a freaking ghost. Not that I don't believe in all that stuff, more like I heard the guy running off through a field at the side of the road. I didn't see him run, but I could 100% hear him running. I don't know what in God's name he was thinking, if it was some weird attempt at taking his own life or what, but Jesus Christ, am I glad I didn't hit him, because I think that would have messed me up for the rest of my life. Hey friends, thank you for listening to today's story. Make sure to click the notification icon to stay updated on all future narrations. I release new videos twice every day at 10 AM and 8 PM Eastern Time. If you have a story to share, please send it to the email displayed on the screen. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like and leave an encouraging comment. It really helps me keep bringing you more narrations like this. If you'd like to support the channel even more, you can get early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you